What's up, everybody? It's Jesse, and I am back again for another installment of Social School. And what we are going to be talking about today are your values, right? So, we are smack dab in the middle of the self awareness unit, and we're finding out about ourselves. And so far, we've covered your needs, your feelings, and today we're going to get into your values and why they're important, especially in the world of work. And so, where I want to start off with is just kind of figuring out what that word means, right? So, you've probably heard it before. I looked it up on Google, and Google says that a person's values are their personal principles or their standards of behavior. And I'm not so sure if I necessarily agree with that, but I just want you to think for a minute, maybe where you've heard that word before. So, a lot of people, they know the word value from watching TV, right? And so, you might have seen it on a commercial. There's like True Value and Value City Furniture. A lot of times when I ask kids, where they've heard that word before, they're like, oh, yeah, the value meal. And I think what that tells us more than anything is how much we as Americans value money. But really, what it comes down to is your values are what is important to you. And sometimes it can be things like honesty or responsibility, respect. Somebody told me loyalty, and I think that those things are really good, but your values really just come down to what's important to you. And so, whether it's something like I mentioned before, or if you're really honest with yourself, maybe what you value is your phone or your car, Netflix, or chicken wings, right? Maybe what you value more than anything is just some nice spicy chicken. I haven't had dinner yet, so that's kind of what's on my mind. Anyway, our values are what's important to us. And the reason why we want to think about our values is because the things that are important to you really should be guiding your decision and your decision making. So when you do things that are consistent with your values, typically those decisions are good. And when we make decisions that are based on on things other than our values or things that aren't consistent with our values, then usually those things don't work out so well. So you think about an example. Typically, when I ask people, especially adults, what are their values? The first thing that they'll say is like family or church or those kind of things. And if somebody tells me that their most important value is their family, but they're working 60, 70 hours a week and they hardly ever get to see their family, then that's not really a values consistent kind of decision. And a lot of times it causes problems. Or if you're somebody who values honesty, but maybe you're stealing from work, or you know that your company is one that is taking things from people, or not being real honest, then that can cause a lot of problems. And so I want you to take a minute and really think about what are your values. And if I had you in actual class, I would make you like sit down and write it out. So take just a minute and really think about what are your values? What is important to you? And even if you have to stop and, stop the video and just think for a minute, list out, what are your values? Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about is where do values come from, right? How do we come up with these things? And for the most part, when I ask people this question, they're like, I don't know, it just happens. But what I'll tell you is that your values actually are contagious, right? You get them from other people, from other places. Sometimes we get our values from our parents, and they're very good things. A lot of people tell me that maybe their value for church came from their grandparents who always took them to church, or their value for hard work came from their mom, and their mom is working two jobs to make ends meet, and they just always got to see those values. Maybe your values come from your friends, right? So if you have a group of friends and they all are kind of into the same stuff, maybe it's sports or cars, video games, right? Maybe if you're anything like most teenagers, your values a lot of times are coming a lot more from your friends and your circle of friends than they are from other sources. But we get values from all kinds of places. And your values actually, like I said before, are contagious. And I want to talk to you just for a minute about something called a meme. And I know that you guys know memes from the internet, but before there was ever an internet, the meme actually just meant an idea that was shared from person to person. And sometimes those memes are really positive things. Maybe it's like democracy or the idea of treating people fairly and those kind of things. But sometimes those ideas, those memes that are shared, those things that are contagious can be things that are maybe sort of negative. Sexism or racism, those are examples of ideas that are shared from person to person. And so I want you to think for a minute about where did your values come from? And if you're someone, say, for example, who values nature, maybe it was long hikes with the family, or I've had some people in class tell me that their value is hunting, and so they got that value from a family member that always used to take them out hunting or whatever it is. And so really think for a second about why it is that you value the things that you value. Where did it come from? Maybe you're somebody that watches a lot of YouTube, or has a certain show that they like, or whatever it is. But it's important for us to kind of think about where our values came from, so that we can sort of touch base with those thoughts, those feelings, those values, and kind of appreciate them for what they are, and where they came from. And so as we move forward, we kind of look at our values and we think about, where they came from. Was it, maybe it was from school or the community? Maybe, it was something that was just instilled in you from a very early age. And I have to tell you, sometimes our values come from examples of people that we see who maybe we disagree with or are not always so positive. A great example from my life. Um, if you don't know, I am a parent. I have an 18-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I take parenting very seriously. And it was something that my parents actually instilled in me, and my values as a parent definitely came from my parents. And some of those things were really positive, and then some of them were examples of how I was raised or parented, and I didn't necessarily appreciate it. So when I was young, my parents were definitely hippies and free spirits. And so, growing up, I didn't have a lot of rules. I never remember having a bedtime. I could eat as much ice cream as I wanted. They just kind of let me do whatever I wanted to do, and thought that, when I started into school, that that would just take care of itself. And so they did not impose a lot of rules or expectations on me. And it had a very negative effect on me. I got in a lot of trouble, right? So the first time that I got into school and somebody told me no, or I had to, do certain things, it didn't go over very well. And so I, as a parent, have actually gone in the opposite direction, right? So my values were influenced in an opposite way, where I have very clear expectations for my kids. They have rules, or there are things like bedtimes, and you got to brush your teeth at a certain time, and you got to do your homework before you go out and play, and all of those things. And so you really want to think about, what are your values, and where they came from. And so I'm going to go in a different direction now. I want you to think for a minute about what are the values at your workplace, right? So if you're not working, maybe you thinking in terms of like at school, or those kind of things, but think about the places where you spend a lot of time, and what are the values there, right? So maybe if you are somebody who is working in a customer service job, maybe the thing that's most important at your place of business is good customer service. You hear things like the customer is always right, and having good customer service, and social skills, people skills. Maybe that's what's important at your job. Or maybe it's something like, I don't know, being on time. I hear that one a lot, right? So being responsible, being reliable, those are things that most employers, are really looking for and really value. So just like I asked you to do before, I want you to take a minute and maybe write it down or just kind of think about it. But I want you to think about, what is important where you work. And if you're not working right now, again, school works the same way. But I want you to think about what are the values there. And so for most of us, we're going to spend a lot of our time at work. And we want to make sure that we understand what the values are in those sorts of situations and in those places, because from workplace to workplace, those values will change. And hopefully, your employers, the people who are paying you, are making it very clear, what those values are. Maybe it's things like cleanliness or hygiene. I don't know necessarily where everybody works, but I want you to think just for a minute about, what are your employer's values? And so again, I hear lots of different answers. People will tell me that, what's important at their job is just getting along with other people, or, empathy. Actually, somebody just recently on a Zoom told me that empathy or kind of understanding the feelings of other people were really important. And so I want you to think now about the list of values that you made and how it matches up with the values in your workplace. Because if there are things that are very important at work, but are not really personal values for you, then it becomes very difficult to be successful in the workplace. So a perfect example is, that punctuality or being on time. And if being on time is really, really important at your work, but it's not so important for you, then, you might have some problems. And so what we want to do is we want to start to maybe try to line up our values with the values of the workplace. And so, another real good example is if, cleanliness or hygiene is super important at your work, then it should probably be a value of yours too. And so when we talk about these values being contagious, maybe we can learn or grow or kind of pick up some of these values from our workplace. Your place of business is a great place for you to kind of find out about the real world and the world of work and what it's going to mean to be an adult. And it might be time for us to try to take our values and line them up with, the places that we work, because otherwise it's going to be hard for you to keep your job. And if the values that we're talking about are school values and things like respect and responsibility are the values that are really emphasized or placed highly at school, and you don't necessarily have those values, then that's going to make your school life so much harder. And hopefully for most of you as juniors and seniors, you've kind of already gotten this down. But I just think that, this self-awareness unit is a good time for you to really check in and think about, what's important to you and what's important at your work, and how do we line those things up. So I believe that the assignment that I'm going to do with this video, the activity that I'm going to do with this video, is I'm going to send out a list of what I have looked up and found out were the top 10 employer values. And I'm going to take that list and I'm going to scramble it all up, right? So the top 10 things. And what I'm going to ask you to do is a couple of things. One, I'm going to ask you to kind of put those things in the list in the order that you think that you would put them in if you were an employer. And then also I will give that list out to your teachers, and you guys can kind of compare notes, see who gets the closest to what the internet had to say about the top 10 employer values. So I appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for watching this video. And yeah, have a great day. Bye-bye.